Breaking story to bring you right now. This is absolutely wild. The Democrats are making some kind of crazy last-ditch effort to try and take Donald Trump out. It is going to fail spectacularly. I can tell you that right from the beginning. But at least understand how crazy they are. That's why we're covering it. This is the new article making the rounds. It's featured first and most predominantly in The Hill. Congress has the power to block Trump from taking office, but lawmakers must act now. They are calling on lawmakers, these guys, Evan and David, opinion writers, they're contributors over at The Hill. They want this to happen ASAP because they do not want Donald Trump coming in as president. I mean, my gosh. They need to go hang out with the folks over at ABC and NBC, right? MSNBC. They said, and I quote here, the Constitution provides that an oath-breaking insurrectionist is ineligible to be president. This is the plain wording of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Quote, no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the U.S., shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. This disability can be removed by a 2/3 vote in each house. Well, one, you're not going to get the vote, and two, he was not an insurrectionist. Didn't we just go through all this? Didn't Jack Smith just pack up his bags and leave? I mean, didn't Fannie, Big Fannie down there in Georgia, just actually get her entire team disqualified along with herself because of, well, some indiscretions along the way? I'm not sure why they're trying to go back to this. I feel like we're relitigating everything that we've already litigated. And yet this is written by some law folks. They were both clerks, I guess, on the Supreme Court. No, maybe just clerks at a state level. But anyway, these two particular people, one went to Columbia, I think one went to Duke, whatever. You know, the Ivies aren't what they used to be. I say that as a Columbia grad, by the way. They're trying to somehow say that you need to go back to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It's just that, you know, they really don't have a leg to stand on. I'm not entirely sure why they're going down this process again. So they're going back to J6, which is, can I say this? Frankly, a hotly contested story, because the version of the story that America got to see over and over again in a loop was all shot by one documentary filmmaker named Alexandra Pelosi, who was the daughter of the Speaker of the House at the time. Think of that. I mean, right? I mean, this was, and then they played it on CNN as an exclusive after they bought it, I guess, from HBO, because she was shooting for HBO. So she probably made money on the whole thing too. And they brought in, what do you know? Some Disney ABC producers. The guy who used to produce Good Morning America produced the trial. So he went through the footage to cherry pick the best moments. And then they played that in a loop in primetime. And they chose primetime deliberately because they wanted everybody to see it. And guess what? None of it mattered, because America still voted for Donald Trump. And yet, these crazy people are still willing to go and try this one again. It will go nowhere. But it speaks volumes about how crazy and how much venom there really is there. I mean, Donald Trump won the whole kit and caboodle. I mean, he took all the battleground states. They weren't battleground. They were there for Trump. All right. So this is just, anyway, it's making the rounds on Twitter too. This opinion piece, they want to use Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to deal with this insurrection thing. And look, I'm just going to say this, because again, I've got pretty good instincts on this stuff. It's not going to get to first base. It's not going to get to first base, but consider everything that's happened. I mean, they hid from us the fact that Joe Biden was a mess. They couldn't bother to primary him. They couldn't bother. They didn't want to offend Joe Biden. They couldn't actually unseat him. And so then they did it after the fact, when they finally realized that he was so incapacitated and suffering from mental health challenges and likely dementia that they had to take him out. In the meantime, they went on to mainstream media and gave us a whole song and dance. You know the drill. And the mainstream media, boy, did they dance. Like this guy.
I think he's better than he's ever been. Intellectually, analytically, because he's been around for 50 years. And, you know, I don't know if people know this or not, Biden used to be a hothead. Sometimes that Irishman would get in front of the reasoning. Sometimes he would say things he didn't want to say. This is, and I don't really, you know what, I don't really care. Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second. And I've no.
Wow. All right. If that's the best Biden, I'd be really curious to see the worst Biden. I mean, that was just a blatant lie. All right. So somebody told him to go and do that. He's out there at the 11th hour trying, just like Georgie boy was saying, oh my gosh, this is like the biggest election since the Civil War. I mean, I'd say it was pretty important. Obviously, I'm coming at it from a different perspective. But come on, Georgie, you just knew it was going to cost you a ton of money.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It is almost over. What comes next is anyone's guess. What we do know is this. No election since the Civil War has posed such a test of our constitutional system. Whether to accept election results and the peaceful transfer of power has never been on the ballot like this. The stakes in this election are as high as it gets. The differences between the candidates are as stark as it gets.
So think about this. And he's like, oh, you know, basically we hate Trump. But think about how they're saying, well, you know, he's not going to accept the results of the election. I'm just going to look at this and say, well, who's not accepting the results of the election? It would seem to me that the liberals are the ones that still don't want to accept the results of the election. Now, why might that be? Well, because it has a financial impact on them, because it's going to change media forever, because gosh darn it, Elon Musk went and out, he bought Twitter and turned it into X. And they don't like that. They don't like the streaming stuff. They don't like the podcast stuff. They don't like that we actually can speak freely over here and have an exchange of dialogue. They want it all controlled by themselves, and they want to keep that little perch. So there's the guy that's on MSNBC that looks, gosh darn it, just like Rachel Maddow. You know who I'm talking about. Chris Hayes. Let me see if I can find this soundbite for you, because this is actually pretty funny to see. Chris Hayes is really quite worked up that all of a sudden media is changing, and he thinks that somehow this is connected to Trump. In other words, if the media hadn't been changing as much as it was, if people hadn't had all that access to information like they've had, God forbid they have access to information. Gosh, now they can read. What are you going to do? My gosh, I mean, think of how disgusting that is, really and truly. Well, this guy, Chris Hayes, is so worried about everyday people actually being able to consume their news sources in different ways. He keeps going back to this, that basically people that don't watch him are the stupid people. So if you don't watch Chris Hayes, you're somehow stupid. And that stupidity means that you're going to vote for someone like Trump. You know, when they talk about low information voters, this is what they're going back to. It's kind of a longer-ish clip, but I want you to hear it because we should talk about this. This is really about Chris Hayes being threatened that his show is irrelevant. We don't even know who he is. We think he's Rachel Maddow, whatever. He's threatened because his show is irrelevant, and increasingly now so. So listen to how he goes on.
As we inch closer to a new year and a new administration, there's still lots of questions about how the election turned out the way it did. And everyone's got their pet reasons. It was inflation, sure. It was Joe Biden's age, also. It was the Democrats doing too much of this or too little of that. But for me, the one piece of data that haunts me is this. Just before the election, the think tank Data for Progress surveyed a month's worth of poll respondents. That's more than 13,000 voters, to see how closely they paid attention to political news. Now, this sample group of voters basically matched the overall results of the election, favoring Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by about 1%, which is how it turned out. But Data for Progress also singled out respondents who said they consume a great deal of political news. That group of voters broke for Kamala Harris by a 6.
In other words, he's like, the voters who watch me, they broke for Kamala. The ones that are watching all the news, of course, because all the news is for Kamala.
Point margin. And among voters who said they consume zero political news, none at all, Donald Trump took a 19-point advantage. Conclusion you can draw from that data is that the less attention Americans paid to the news, the likelier they were to be big Trump supporters. And we just entered a new environment in which the news as a distinct entity is kind of crumbling. It's being replaced by the endless scroll of content, the ambient information environment that people breathe into their lungs the way you breathe in both air and pollution at the same time. So now you have people who don't pay attention to the failing news media, as it's called by its critics, but are still getting some clues and information from algorithm-driven social networks about what's happening in our democracy, what the government is doing, what the status quo is, what people are proposing to do about it. And this has produced a situation in which the basic way that people relate to their own self-governance and the information they get about it is about as bad and degraded as I personally have ever seen it. There are a lot of reasons for that. We'll be exploring those reasons throughout this special show tonight. One place where this bleak information environment is the most obvious is what used to be called Twitter, now X, the social media site that got bought by far-right billionaire Elon Musk, who very clearly intentionally manipulated the platform to become a de facto pro-Trump right-wing propaganda outlet, and he succeeded. Studies by the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and academic organizations have found that the site forced political content on users. That content was almost invariably pro-Trump, pro-Republican, and pro-Musk. Musk has also shared or amplified far-right and racist conspiracy theories on the site, all while accounts for mainstream news outlets and liberal politicians get less engagement and more abuse.
So he's worried because you see people are getting a lot of views from X. But X is the one place where you could actually, I'll say this in present tense, you can actually talk about stuff. I mean, there was a time, don't forget, when you couldn't even talk about the fact that the virus had been created in a lab in China known as Wuhan, and that was the place that was the location of the first 3 people who were hospitalized with coronavirus. That wasn't allowed. like all the platforms had censored that. I mean, for goodness sakes, Facebook took Donald Trump off of the platform. Twitter did the same exact thing. I mean, the Ayatollah could stay, but not Donald Trump. Come on. You can't tell me you believe in freedom of speech and then say, we're going to just outlaw everything. You can't say this, you can't think that, you can't say this, because we have to be this, that, and the other. No, that was micromanagement controlled from the likes of the Biden administration. Those days have ended, and that is terrifying for the mainstream media because it means they have ended. They've really ended. I mean, they've ended so much that now they're going to lose like the only source of income that they even had. The income that comes from the big pharma companies.